The X-Zone Radio Show with Rob McConnell is largely an opinion talk show. All opinions, comments, or statements of fact expressed by Rob McConnell's guests are strictly their own and are not to be construed as those of the X-Zone Radio Show or endorsed in any manner by Rob McConnell, REL-MAR McConnell Media Company, the X-Zone Broadcast Network, its affiliated networks, stations, employees, or advertisers.
All Hit Radio.
Welcome to the X Zone, a place where fact is fiction and fiction is reality. Now, here's your host, Rob McConnell.
Good evening, one and all, and welcome to the X Zone. I am Rob McConnell, and for the next 4 hours, I'm your host and your guide as together we cross the time-space continuum to this place that I call the X Zone. It's a place where people dare to believe and dare to be heard. It's a place where fact is fiction and fiction is reality. And the X Zone comes to you Monday through Friday from 10 p.m. Eastern until 2 a.m. Eastern right here on the X Zone Broadcast Network, Talkstar Radio Network, Mutual Broadcast Network, Simul Radio, and Simul TV, and iHeartRadio. If you'd like to visit us on any social media site, it's X-Zone Radio TV. And you can always send an email to xzone@xzoneradiotv.com. And for all the programming we have available for you 24/7, 365 on the X-Zone Broadcast Network, www.xzbn.net. X-Zone Nation, my first guest tonight is Gilbert Jarvis. He is a storyteller and professional folklorist living on the island of Newfoundland off Canada's northeast coast. By day, Jarvis is a provincial folklorist for the province of Newfoundland and Labrador, the first provincially funded folklorist position in Canada. By night, he is the proprietor of St. John's Haunted Hike, Ghost Tour, and recounter of local tales. Dale tells ghost stories, stories of fairies and little people, tales of phantom ships and superstitions, and legends and traditional tales from Newfoundland, Labrador, and beyond. His repertoire is unique in Canada, including long-form folk and fairy tales from the island, with a wide-ranging knowledge of local legends, tall tales, and myths. His most recent book is Haunted Ground, Ghost Stories from the Rock. It's published by Flanker Press. And joining me now is Dale Gilbert Jarvis. And Dale, welcome to the X Zone.
Thank you for having me.
My goodness, that's quite a repertoire you've got.
That's quite the intro.
Yeah. Listen, tell me, how did you get interested in folklores and fairies and ghost ships and all the wonderful things that you talk about?
You know, I think it's something that I've always been interested in. I've always been drawn to stories of the supernatural, the unexplained, the unusual. Even when I was a little kid, you know, I was drawn to that type of material. And you know, I was always interested in history as well. You know, I loved history in school, and I studied archaeology when I went off to university. And then from there, I ended up moving out to the East Coast, and there was a program of folklore here at Memorial University, and that's how I ended up as a folklorist. You know, studying how people tell stories about the places where they live and the interesting things that they believe.
Well, would you be classified as a local historian when it comes to myth, tales, and urban legends?
Yeah, I think that's a pretty good way of putting it. You know, it's certainly something that I have a deep interest in, and I'm a bit of a collector as well of local lore and local stories.
Tell me, how haunted is Newfoundland and Labrador?
That is a very good question. And it's one of those things that's hard to really compare to other places. But, you know, I grew up in southern Ontario, actually not too far from Hamilton, Brantford, Ontario.
Oh, my goodness.
I
just
never really knew ghost stories growing up as a kid, right?
Brantford, it's just down the hall a little bit, and about 15 minutes from here, yeah.
Yeah. But since coming out here, I moved out here in the early 90s, and it's like every other person has a strange story about some ghostly premonition that
Right.
someone in their family had, or stories of phantom ships. Lots of stories about the fairies that people still tell. Those kind of older European beliefs that kind of died out in other parts of North America persisted here for a really, really long time.
Do you think the fairies came across with the Europeans that settled earlier into Canada and the United States?
Yeah, there is a really interesting tradition of that here, and some of the stories that people tell, like you can say, okay, those are kind of Irish types of fairies, and then other types of fairy stories you hear, you can say, okay, those are more kind of English West Country fairies, but they also kind of act here in a way that is different from the fairies of the old world. So whether they came with the settlers, or they were here before Europeans came, there's an indigenous tradition in North America of little people, and that's true here on the East Coast, but all across Canada, North America, there are lots of indigenous stories about, kind of a race of hidden people that live in the world, and so it's possible that these things are stories that pop up all around the world. I think you could go pretty much anywhere in the world, and there's some kind of interaction with the unseen.
These little people, are they the same description throughout Canada and the United States, or do the descriptions change as we get into different cultural areas?
Yeah, they really do change. And even here on the island of Newfoundland, the descriptions of them are incredibly different. Sometimes they approach that image of what we might think of as a gnome, that little kind of person with a red cap. But sometimes they look like us. They look like humans. Sometimes they might take on a non-human appearance. There was a tradition here of fairies appearing in little whirlwinds, swirls of dust. People would say, "Oh, that's a fairy," and people would get picked up by these whirlwinds and taken off to fairy realms. I did an interview with a woman a while back who told me a fairy story where her and her sister went with her mother, and this was many years ago, on kind of a country road, and they could hear someone coming along on a horse. It was a very, very cloudy night, and the horse stopped. The mother called out to who she thought was riding the horse, because there was only one neighbor that had a riding horse rather than a workhorse. And the figure didn't answer. The clouds parted, the moon came out and shone down on the horse, which was a natural flesh and blood kind of horse. But there was a man on the horse who was made of shadows. He had no discernible features. He just had the shadowy outline of a person, as if a shadow had come to life. And he turned the horse off to one side and disappeared off into the bush. And people said that was a fairy rider, so it had kind of human form, but obviously not really human in the way that we would think of a human looking.
Since getting to Newfoundland, have you yourself have you had a paranormal experience of any kind?
Yeah, I bought a house that came with its own set of ghosts.
Oh, that's cool.
Yeah, I purchased a house in St. John's, 1999, and kind of not too far from downtown St. John's, not too far from the harbor, maybe a 10-minute walk.
Right.
And there was a story about a woman who had died in the house. She had died in the front hall, an older woman who had lived here alone for many years. And her spirit may still haunt the place, but she's not a terrifying spirit in any way, relatively helpful, and has been known at times to return items that are lost. So if, for example, I've lost, my keys or something, I can ask for the spirit to bring them back. There's also in this house the energy of a black cat. which I have personally experienced several times. People who are around cats will know the sensation of having a cat brush up against your lower leg. And I have felt that and looked down, and there isn't a cat there. And I have seen out of the corner of my eye a black cat in various locations in the house. So for whatever reason, that the home that I am in is one that comes replete with paranormal energy.
You have your own ghost. Does the ghost make contact with you? Does it try to communicate with you? Have you seen it?
I have not seen it. No, I've kind of seen its after effects, so if I have missed something and I will ask for it back, that object will appear in a strange location. But a friend of mine, her mother came to pick her up from the house at one point and said, "Oh, I saw, Dale's wife sitting in the rocking chair in the front room." And this friend said, "Oh no, she wasn't home at that point." But the mother had clearly seen the figure of this woman with kind of long dark hair in a rocking chair in the front room of our house. So some people have seen her. I have not. She's not made herself visible to me.
Dale, stand by. You and I have to take our first break for this hour. Exonation. Our guest is Dale Gilbert Jarvis, and his website is. Do you have your pencils and paper ready? Exonation. There's two of them, www.nlunexplained.ca and www.hauntedhike.com. Dale and I will continue talking about haunted Newfoundland and Labrador here in the X-Zone from our broadcast center in Hamilton, Ontario, Canada. Not very far down the road from where Dale grew up in Brantford, Ontario. This is the X-Zone. I am Rob McConnell. www.xchroniclesnewspaper.com is where you can get your very own copy of the X Chronicles newspaper, and for all the programming information that we have on the X-Zone Broadcast Network, www.xzbn.net. We'll be back on the other side of this short break. Don't go away. Did you know that when you're on the road with limited data or Wi-Fi, you can still listen to the X-Zone Radio Show with Rob McConnell, The Science of Magic with Gwilda Wiyaka, X-1, Dimension X, Space Patrol, and every minute of the X-Zone Broadcast Network by calling 213-401-0080, courtesy of Audio Now. No smartphone, app, or internet needed. It saves your data plan, and it's free if you have unlimited minutes. Call 213-401-0080 to listen on any phone, anytime, anywhere. Remember 213-401-0080 for the best of the paranormal, parapsychology, and sci-fi radio programming anywhere, 24/7, 365.
You have heard of the X-Zone? Now watch it on Simul TV. Plus 500 video games, live TV channels, free video on demand, worldwide, and more. Does this sound like tomorrow's television? Well, it is, but you can have it today, right now. It is Simul TV. Simul TV offers what the others only wish they could provide. 15 exclusive channels like X-Zone, Sci-Fi, and Horror. We are worldwide. No other provider offers that. 500 built-in video games. No need to have an extra expensive system. We have them included. Free video on demand. Live streaming events from around the world. Interactive online network, and much more. Tomorrow's TV today. Simul TV. Sound too good to be true? Well, it's not. You can have Simul TV today. Sign up at simultv.com. Do it today.
We live in rapidly shifting times of extreme volatility and uncertainty. Such profound change brings a unique opportunity for the evolution of consciousness. I'm Gwilda Wiyaka, host of Mission Evolution Radio Show, a program that explores the latest scientific developments and deepening spiritual truths supporting human evolution. Join me on xzbn.net, where I interview leading experts in science, physics, medicine, spirituality, and more. By applying divergent viewpoints to leading-edge topics, we uncover expansive and evolutionary truth to assist you on your path to enlightenment. More information and past episodes are available at missionevolution.org.
And we're back on Simul Radio, X-Zone Broadcast Network, Talkstar Radio Network, let me see, Simul TV, and of course, iHeartRadio. Dale Gilbert Jarvis is our special guest. www.nlunexplained.ca and www.hauntedhike.com. Dale, in your opinion, what is a ghost and why do they hang around?
Yeah, that's a really interesting question. I think the standard idea of a ghost being the spirit of someone who is left behind doesn't really explain all the strange things that we do hear stories about or that we experience. Newfoundland has this amazing tradition of phantom ships, yes, for example, and so very clearly that they are not what we would think of as a soul. I like to think of ghosts as being almost hiccups in time. I think sometimes for those sort of anniversary hauntings where something tragic has happened, like a death or a murder or a shipwreck or a disaster, and then there is a haunting that happens on the anniversary of that. Perhaps what we are looking at are kind of psychic echoes of the past, or perhaps we are perceiving an event that is actually happening in the past over and over and over. Sometimes, though, one of the most common types of stories that I hear from people in Newfoundland is what here people would call a token. And this is called other things in other places. Some people call them forerunners in Nova Scotia or fetches in Ireland. Mm-hmm. That's where someone gets a warning of some kind that someone close to them has either recently died or that their death is about to occur. And that can manifest itself in a number of different ways. But and I think that kind of speaks to a deep bond between people of some kind, so that at the moment of someone's passing, that there is this kind of link between the two that kind of pulls them together before right. They are separated for eternity. That's probably the most common type of story that I hear from people, that they have had something happen at the moment or just before someone's death.
Now, you said that the anniversary hauntings occur on a date perpetually, right?
Yeah.
But let me ask you this: what happens in a leap year?
That's a very good question. So that nature has a way of sort of sorting itself out somehow. These are ancient stories, and sometimes sometimes I wonder, if maybe our perception of the way the universe unfolds is really quite imperfect. I think the world works in mysterious ways, and our ability to comprehend the vastness and the mystery of the universe is perhaps not as great as we like to think it is.
Right. Tell us about some of the phantom ship stories that you tell those people who come to visit with you.
Yeah, one of the ones that I quite like is a story about a ship called the Isle of Skye. There was a family here, the Mackey family, in a place called Holyrood, which is not that far from St. John's, 40 minutes or so outside of St. John's, in kind of the bottom of Conception Bay. They were a fishing family, and like many families, they had fishing premises in Labrador. So they would kind of sail out at the beginning of the fishing season. They would go to Labrador, they would fish, and then return back to Newfoundland and then sell their fish to the merchants here. One year there was one of the young brothers, one of the Mackey brothers, was quite sick. And so the family waited as long as they could, but eventually left without him, not really knowing if they would ever see him again. And the boy recuperated. He recovered his health. He stayed with his mother for that summer while the brothers were out fishing. And in the fall of the year, he looked out one moonlit night out into the bay, and he could see the Isle of Skye sailing in to the harbor. And he said to his mother, I'm going to go out with the little rowboat and get my brothers, and you put the kettle on, and we'll have a cup of tea. Got out, rowed out to the center of the bay, and there was nothing there. There was no ship whatsoever. And mystified by this, he rowed back and told his mother what had happened. And a few days later, word came that the Isle of Skye had been caught in a storm further north, and all hands had been lost on the ship. And what he had seen was one of these kind of hauntings of the ship returning to the port it had left but would never return to in a physical form. And that haunting, the haunting of the Isle of Skye, returns every year, people say, around that same time of year, in the fall of the year when the fishermen would have come home. And what is interesting, in that particular area, that return of that ghost ship is now seen as a warning of a coming storm. So it might not be tied specifically to a date, but tied to a type of weather pattern. And that is a recurring theme with a lot of these kind of ghost ship stories, that they now serve as a warning of something that is going to happen in the present, so that there might be a terrible storm or the wind is about to change or something like that. Lots of stories like that, the story of the Isle of Skye.
What are some of the most haunted places in Newfoundland?
Things, interestingly enough, tend to cluster. That's one thing that I find as someone who's been collecting ghost stories here for over 2 decades. What I find really interesting is how there are certain areas of, I guess what you would say, high weirdness, where things unusual tend to happen in close proximity to others. So in St. John's, as an example, there's a street downtown, Victoria Street. It used to be called Meeting House Lane. There was a Congregationalist meeting house at the street back in the 18th century. That street, for whatever reason, is a street that has more ghosts, per mile than any other street that I know of, and a real range of stuff. Some of them are contemporary ghost stories. There's a theater there that is said to be haunted by the ghost of a young man who's involved with the theater, who's there. Ghostly lights, ladies gliding on the stairs. There's a remarkable story that was in the local newspaper in 1907 about 2 screaming, hair-pulling ghosts that appeared in a room. Ghostly knockings, quite an active area. And I honestly don't know why that area has more ghost stories. You could go 1 block over, and there is not the same depth of stories. But there's something about that little piece of ground that is a magnet for strange activity.
Cat fight in the theater with 2 ghosts pulling each other's hair. Now, when you've gone to these places to check the stories out, have you seen any of the stories play out in real time?
No, and it's interesting because I'm always interested in kind of historical stories. So sometimes the stories I'm interested in are stories that happened 100 years ago.
I see.
But now I have had many people come on the tour that I run, the haunted hike that I run through St. John's.
Right.
And perhaps I am not a sensitive person in the way that some others are. We actually had a woman come on the ghost tour just this past week. I wasn't doing the tour that night, but one of my guides was doing the tour, and he said to me afterwards that this woman had come to a certain spot where we tell a story about a famous murder case where 2 children were murdered back in the 1950s. And there is a ghost story that is associated with it. And the woman on the tour had the sense of that woman being present and mournful and weeping. They moved on to another spot on the tour, and the same woman had an encounter with a jovial gentleman, is how she described him. So very, very clearly, there are things that are still kind of happening in the neighborhood, and I guess different people, depending on their level of sensitivity, can experience these things.
Why do you think ghost hunting, ghost research, ghost tours are so popular these days?
I think people are fascinated. It is that eternal mystery. What happens to us? When we walk through this life, what happens next? People are fascinated by that. I think people come on my ghost tour because they are curious, and certainly there is that element of the macabre as well. People like a scary kind of spooky story, but I think people come on my tour who are at both ends of the belief spectrum. I get people who are absolutely true believers, people who have had experiences themselves, who have had experiences on the haunted hike. But then I also get people who are diehard skeptics, debunkers, who nonetheless are really fascinated by these stories, and they attend for a different kind of reason. But everyone who comes is there because they are interested in the unexplained. There is a human desire to experience the strange and the unusual, and I think that's why people come.
But how much of the strange experiences that people have are caused by their own psyche?
Yeah. I have met a lot of people who have had strange experiences, paranormal experiences, and I think there is a correlation to a certain extent between the people who tend to attract maybe negative type of spiritual energy and people who are experiencing some kind of trauma in their own life. I think energy feeds on energy, and I have seen that firsthand. I have heard stories from people about experiences that they have had of a paranormal nature, and I know that they are living particularly stressful lives. And so sometimes I think there's a correlation between those two things, as you say.
All right, Dale, stand by. Dale Gilbert Jarvis is our special guest this hour, Exonation. www.nlunexplained.ca and www.hauntedhike.com. And Dale and I will be back on the other side of the news as we continue here in the X Zone from our broadcast center and studios in Hamilton, Ontario, Canada. Don't go away.
From our broadcast studios in Hamilton, Ontario, Canada, to the world and beyond, you're watching the X Zone Broadcast Network, www.xzbn.net.
AVS Media Den.
You have heard of the X Zone? Now watch it on Simul TV, plus 500 video games, live TV channels, free video on demand, worldwide, and more. Does this sound like tomorrow's television? Well, it is, but you can have it today, right now. It is Simul TV. Simul TV offers what the others only wish they could provide. 15 exclusive channels like X Zone, sci-fi, and horror. We are worldwide. No other provider offers that. 500 built-in video games. No need to have an extra expensive system. We have them included. Free video on demand. Live streaming events from around the world, interactive online network, and much more. Tomorrow's TV today. Simul TV. Sound too good to be true? Well, it's not. You can have Simul TV today. Sign up at simultv.com. Do it today.
Did you know that when you're on the road with limited data or Wi-Fi, you can still listen to the X Zone Radio Show with Rob McConnell, The Science of Magic with Gwilda Wiyaka, X-1, Dimension X, Space Patrol, and every minute of the X Zone Broadcast Network by calling 213-401-0080, courtesy of Audio Now. No smartphone, app, or internet needed. It saves your data plan and it's free if you have unlimited minutes. Call 213-401-0080 to listen on any phone, anytime, anywhere. Remember 213-401-0080 for the best of the paranormal, parapsychology, and sci-fi radio programming anywhere, 24/7, 365. Rob McConnell here, presenting an overview for Nicholas Paul Jennings, author of a fascinating book, Amen. It presents facts revealed by Egyptologists, facts that enable us to understand why Amen is the beginning of creation of God. It provides recommendations for religious leaders of the major religions to unify their beliefs and teach the Word of God. Love one another. Amen informs people how mankind conceived God. It was the Egyptians that developed the concepts of a soul, a hereafter, and Son of God. And finally, after the worship of many gods, they conceived the belief in one universal God, the maker of all there is. For more information, visit www.futureofgodamen.com. That's www.futureofgodamen.com.
Welcome back, one and all. Dale Gilbert Jarvis is our special guest all the way in Newfoundland tonight. And his website is www.nlunexplained.ca. And NL, for all of you who are saying, what does NL stand for? That's Newfoundland and Labrador. Unexplained.ca and www.hauntedhike.com. Gilbert, how do you go about researching the stories that you tell? Do people know that you do what you do and they come to you and they say, hey, listen, Gilbert, you're not going to believe this. I should say, Dale, you're not going to believe this story, but I've got an uncle way back when who told me this story.
Yeah, it happens to me all the time. And I think because I am so known now in the community, people will come up to me and say, oh, you're the ghost guy. I was at a hardware store earlier tonight, and a man shouted out across the way. He's like, oh, I was just thinking about you and ghost stories. So it does happen. I got into a cab. This is a true story. I got into a cab a little while ago, and the cabbie was kind of looking at me, and he said, you're the ghost guy. And I said, yeah, I'm the ghost guy. And I've developed almost a bit of a sixth sense for when someone has a story for me. And so we were driving through town. We were heading to work. And so we got chatting, and I said, where did you grow up? And he said, oh, I grew up in the south side of St. John's. Now, south side of the harbor has a lot of ghost stories and a lot of fairy stories as well. And I said, oh, lots of fairy stories on the south side. And he said, no, I never heard any stories about the fairies. He said, but I do know the story about the ghost kittens.
Ghost kittens.
And I said, well, I have a ghost cat. I need to know the story about the ghost kittens. And he said there was a fellow that he knew when he was growing up. And those of us who are animal lovers, as I am, there's kind of a sad part to this story. At a certain point in our not that distant history, we didn't have humane societies, if you had a cat who had a litter of kittens that were unwanted, a common thing for people to do would be to put the kittens in a bag and take it down to the harbor and dispose of the kittens that way. Yeah. And that is what this gentleman had done. He had taken this bag of kittens and then thrown it into the harbor, watched it sink down into the water, and he went home that night. And that night he was in his kitchen, made himself a cup of tea, and he looked up, and here sitting on the window ledge outside his window was a row of soaking wet,
oh my gosh,
ghostly kittens, translucent kittens here sitting on the window who had come back to haunt him for his deed. And this was the story that this cab driver told me on my way to work one morning. And that happens to me all the time. So in terms of the research that I do, people quite often will come up to me and tell me a story in passing. And my standard kind of procedure is to then kind of try to arrange a time where I can record them telling their story or get them to email me the story. And then I try to do the historical research, I guess, to kind of flesh out that story. I try to see if there are other stories like it in the area or to kind of get to some of the background. Now, a little story like that might not have much with it, but if I hear a story about a haunted house, for example, or a haunted shop or church, there are a lot of historical records that help me try and piece together what really happened in the past. And I love that kind of historical detective work mixed with my love of ghost stories.
What has been your most awe-inspiring moment while conducting a ghost investigation, you doing the research for one of your stories?
Goodness, that's a very good question. There are certain buildings that really stand out in my mind. One of my favorite haunted buildings here in St. John's is our old Masonic temple. It's a beautiful late Victorian brick Masonic temple, 3 stories. It has the great all-seeing eye of the architect of the universe in copper at the top of the building. And that is a particularly haunted building. The Masons ran it for over 100 years. They eventually moved out of the building. The building is now a dinner theater, a performance space. And it's always been my great pleasure to go into that space. There was a gentleman, John Warren, who worked there for many, many years, an English gentleman who was one of the Masons, and he had amazing stories about his personal experiences. And I got to go through with the building with him and see, some of these spaces that had been that the Masons had kept very secret for a long, long time, including their chamber of contemplation, which is this kind of dungeon-like space in the building where non-Masons never would have been allowed to get in. So being able to, kind of be invited into these story-rich, ghost-rich spaces, right, and be able to do research has been a great pleasure.
Why do you believe ghostly tales are so important to Newfoundland and Labrador culture?
I think we do have a great storytelling culture here. Yeah. You're hard pressed to meet a Newfoundlander who can't tell you a great story. It's we're known for that now. Yeah. I think across North America, a lot of Canadian comedians and actors that they have Newfoundland roots, and I think that's part of that kind of Anglo-Irish tradition of just being really great storytellers. I think stories are a way of keeping the history alive, and I think people are kind of proud of their connection to the supernatural world. In other parts of North America, I think if you start talking about ghosts, you start talking about fairies, people think, oh, there's something not quite right with that person. But here it's almost there's a bit of pride that comes with that, because it does show that link to the heritage and culture of the place.
There's a comedian from Newfoundland. I believe it's Jimmy Carr.
I think he's English, but he's here all the time. Yeah.
We my wife and I went down to Niagara and watched his part of his Christmas TV special for CBC a couple of years ago, and I must tell you something. There were a number of Newfoundlanders from the Greater Toronto area that were in Niagara. And you Newfoundlanders are warm, fun-loving, great people.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. The musical, the Broadway musical, Come From Away, which has been such a great hit. It's been a great thing to see people respond to that story of how generous and hospitable and funny Newfoundlanders are. It's a good place to be.
Why do you think there's so much richness of paranormal activity in Newfoundland compared to New Brunswick, Nova Scotia? PEI, I haven't heard very many stories from PEI, and I've been doing this show for 28 years. Yeah. But Newfoundlanders, we had John Mallard on the other night.
Yeah, who's done a lot of great EVP research.
Yeah, he's a great guy.
Yeah, I think part of it is that we have such a great depth of history here. The Europeans were here in Newfoundland much, much earlier than they were anywhere else in North America. We have one of the only authenticated Viking settlements in North America here in Newfoundland at Lansom Meadows. So that, and we actually have, as part of that, the oldest ghost story, the oldest European ghost story in North America is one of these Viking stories. In the Vinland sagas, there's a story of a gentleman, Thorstein, who was one of the sons of Eric the Red, who had died in the New World, who had died in Vinland. And he, at one point, his corpse, before they could take it back to Greenland, his corpse kind of sat up, this revenant corpse, and spoke words of prophecy to his wife Gudrid, and then before collapsing back down again. So we have 1,000 odd years of these European ghost stories. So I think that's one of the advantages we have over some of the other parts of Canada in terms of our ghostly history.
And Exonation, if you weren't listening the other night when I had John Mallard on, I must tell you that just the name of his book tells you what kind of great people the Newfoundlanders are. It was called Newfie EVP.
Yeah.
And that says it all.
He's a great guy. He's doing lots of great work here and really kind of promoting that more investigative side of ghost hunting. Yeah.
Wow. Any other type of paranormal activity in Newfoundland? For example, sea monsters.
Oh, yes. I mean, we could do a whole show just on Newfoundland sea monsters.
Really?
There's an incredible history of that here. And some of them, are based in actual science fact. One of the very first scientific sightings and studies of the giant squid. And we all know about giant squid now, but there was a time when they were believed to be kind of mythological creatures.
The Kraken, right?
Yeah. And the first place that they were really studied in any kind of scientific way was here in Newfoundland. There was a Methodist or Presbyterian minister who was a naturalist. He was really interested in natural philosophy and the ecology of the seas. And fishermen there had been two fishermen and a boy had been out in a little rowboat near Bell Island, and they had gone after what they thought was wreckage. They had reached out with a hook to kind of hook into what they thought was something that had been jettisoned from a ship or wreckage from a ship, and it opened one giant kind of baleful eye and then cast these great tentacles around their little rowboat. Threatening to sink it, the Newfoundlanders fought back, took an axe, chopped off one of these tentacles, brought it back to Portugal Cove and presented it to the local minister, who said, there's this minister in St. John's, Moses Harvey, go take your tentacle to him. And he hung this tentacle up in his bathtub and photographed it. He was an amateur photographer. This was in the 1890s. And the very first kind of scientific study of the giant squid named the giant squid after that prominent Newfoundlander. The name of the squid was Architeuthis harveyi, after Moses Harvey, who had done this first study of the giant squid. So some of them are scientific stories, but then there's other
Well, we're going to have to go and do a bit of a cliffhanger here, my friend, because I've got to take my final break.
No worries.
All right, Exonation. Dale Gilbert Jarvis is our guest this hour. www.nlunexplained.ca and www.hauntedhike.ca, and he is the author of Haunted Ground, Ghost Stories from the Rock. It's published by Flanker Press, and we'll talk more about his book on the other side of this break. Don't go away.
You have heard of the X Zone? Now watch it on Simul TV, plus 500 video games, live TV channels, free video on demand, worldwide, and more. Does this sound like tomorrow's television? Well, it is, but you can have it today, right now. It is Simul TV. Simul TV offers what the others only wish they could provide. 15 exclusive channels like X Zone, sci-fi, and horror. We are worldwide. No other provider offers that. 500 built-in video games. No need to have an extra expensive system. We have them included. Free video on demand. Live streaming events from around the world. Interactive online network, and much more. Tomorrow's TV today. Simul TV. Sound too good to be true? Well, it's not. You can have Simul TV today. Sign up at simultv.com. Do it today.
The new nonfiction book, Razor of Madness, is similar to cult movies like Clockwork Orange, Dragon's Tattoo, or The Other Side of Hell. Wayne Morin Jr. and Thomas Lee Howell will expose widespread and systematic deficiencies in this thought-provoking tell-all novel. Mind control rages among scholars in law schools. Human rights are ignored while thought reform and mental manipulation are accepted practices used as behavior modification. Dr. Louis Jolyon West comes to mind. Media and public scrutiny shows that United States mental hospitals are in fact destructive murder industries. Razor of Madness expose novel details this epidemic through an in-depth professional and personal investigation. For decades, there has been a revolving door policy that still releases killers and pedophiles back into society. The maestro of mind control continues to haunt America to this very day. Razor of Madness is available in paperback or as a downloadable ebook at Amazon.com.
The concept of a new age has been around since the late 19th century, yet much of its original meaning has been lost. What exactly is the New Age? Is it a religion, a collection of obscure esoteric practices, a series of doomsday predictions, or an astrological event? The New Age Chronicles is a unique, complementary publication bringing reason and grounded information to separate fact from fiction. Chock full of valuable information to support you as we make the monumental shift into the new era. You won't want to miss a single innovative issue. The New Age Chronicles newspaper is coming soon to www.newagechronicles.com.
Welcome back, one and all. This is the X Zone. I am Rob McConnell, coming to you from our broadcast center and studios in beautiful Hamilton, Ontario, Canada. For all of you who keep sending me emails on, Rob, where's Hamilton? Well, it seems that you either do not have MapQuest or you do not have Google Earth, so I'll tell you. If you know where Lake Ontario is, one of the great 5 lakes in North America. Okay, everybody's shaking their head, yes, okay. When you find Toronto on the north shore of Lake Ontario, and then you find Niagara Falls, that is where the Niagara River flows into Lake Ontario from Fort Erie. If you go north towards Toronto on the QEW, you're going to see it kind of looks like a horseshoe. Well, we call that the Golden Horseshoe, and Hamilton is smack dab in the middle of the horseshoe. And next time you're around, drop in, say hi. Friendly people, just like all Canadians are friendly people, including our good friends on the East Coast, and especially in Newfoundland. We had John Mallard on earlier this week, and tonight we're talking to Dale Gilbert Jarvis. His website is nlunexplained.ca and hauntedhike.com. Tell us about, we were doing a bit of a cliffhanger because we were talking about the Kraken's tentacle that was hanging up in the minister's bathtub, and he was an amateur photographer.
Yes, yeah, and so there's a great tradition of that here, and not just giant squid, but I could go on and on. There's lots of stories about mermen and giant fanged seahorses. Fishermen love to spin a yarn, I think, sometimes. So we have this great tradition of these sea monsters, but the oceans are largely still unexplored. We don't know how many strange things lurk beneath the surface.
And a lot of lives have been lost. Isn't there a graveyard in St. John's where a number of the people who lost their lives on the Titanic are buried?
That graveyard is in Halifax.
I'm sorry, right.
Newfoundland was the place where the message was received.
Right.
And then the ships that came to pick up the survivors and to pick up some of the bodies went on to Halifax. And so there is a quite a moving graveyard there in Halifax that is a memorial to some of those victims. Yeah.
What are the most recent ghost stories that you talk about?
I still get ghost stories from people all the time. People who have strange experiences. There are buildings here that continue to have ghost stories. I got an email a little while ago, which I haven't followed up yet, but a woman was telling me about a haunted Tim Hortons, which is our great Canadian donut and coffee chain. So there are contemporary stories. That's the exciting thing for someone like me. I'm interested in historical stories, but ghost stories continue today. There's still people who have strange experiences. And so I love collecting some of those modern stories. In my book, Haunted Ground, I document some of these more kind of urban legend, strange contemporary stories as well. So we have stories there's a place called Glovertown here in Newfoundland, which has a very localized urban legend about a creature called Red Eyes, which is a ghost of a man who was killed in what was an unfinished mill, a pulp mill, and his ghost has been seen recently, kind of haunting this place with these glowing red eyes that peer out of the darkness, and a lot of stories in that community specifically about that particular spirit.
All right, as we're in Ontario, not very far from where Tim Hortons started, I have to ask you about the haunted Tim Hortons. I really do.
Yeah, that's it. That's on my to-do list, and I think it's going to be interesting, just because I think it's one of these examples of how ghost stories are, if you'll pardon the expression, a living tradition. You know, that they are still things that unfold. So I don't have a lot of details. That's for future work. So I'll have to, when I know more about the haunted Tim Hortons, I'll have to come back and let you know.
Oh, definitely. How long did it take you to write your book, Haunted Ground, Ghost Stories from the Rock? And how many stories are in your book?
Oh gosh, how many stories are in the book? The book's it's about 120 pages or so, and there are I like to break things down into chapters that are kind of related. So there's a number of stories. How long did it take me? That's a hard question to answer as well, because I'm constantly collecting stories and writing stories. I have the blog website that you mentioned, NL Unexplained. So quite often what I'll do is I will learn the core of a story. I'll learn a bit of a story, and I'll write a couple blog entries about it. I'll do a bit of research. I'll put that out there and then solicit more information. So sometimes the books take a fairly long time to write. Generally what I tend to do is I kind of putter away at a bunch of stories. Then when I have a good group of stories, I'll kind of sit down for a month or two and really kind of refine them. So the process of writing that book, on and off, maybe about 2 years to write that particular book.
And how many stories do you have all told?
Oh my goodness, hundreds, I would say, hundreds of stories. The Haunted Ground is, I think, the 6th book of ghost stories that I've written. So there's no shortage. Years ago, I was asked to write a ghostly column called Newfoundland Unexplained for the local newspaper. They'd asked me to write it weekly, and I thought, there's no way I can come up with 52 stories for a year. And so I wrote it every other week. I said I thought I could get 26 stories. And I wrote that column for 10 years, and I never ran out of stories.
With all these stories out there, with all of these hauntings that are going on, do you find that there's a lot of ghosts that kind of linger on in hotels and bars?
Yeah, one of the stories that I tell on the St. John's Haunted Hike is a ghostly tavern story, which is quite a gruesome little story. And taverns and bars and hotels are those places that do tend to attract stories. There was a little inn downtown St. John's that is no longer, it's actually for sale right now. Someone's looking to buy a haunted property. And I remember going and talking to the city archivist at one point, and she said there was a couple who had stayed there who had come in, and they had had strange experiences in the hotel, and they were looking for information about the history of the building. And she gave them what she could. The next day, another couple came in and looking for information on the building, and she said, "Oh, you must know the first couple, the couple that was in here yesterday." And they said, "No, we don't know them." But then they proceeded to tell a very, very similar experience about the exact same hotel, the ghost of a man, which locals have called Jacob, a figure of a man kind of in Edwardian evening clothes, smoking a pipe, who has been seen kind of leaning against the fireplace in one of those upper rooms of the hotel.
Any reports of UFOs that have come to your desk?
Yes, and there are some great people here who are doing lots of work on UFOs as well. I'll have to hook you up with our local UFO expert, Lee Tizard, who has done really a lot of great work documenting that. And we had a couple U.S. bases here during the Second World War and the Cold War, and so the Project Blue Book. So those of you who are UFO aficionados will know Project Blue Book. There are several accounts of UFO sightings here in relation to those American air bases, both in Newfoundland and in Labrador.
Well, isn't there still a joint U.S.-Canadian base in Gander? Or is that strictly
there's
Canadian now?
There's still a Canadian base anyway in
Yeah.
Gander, and Happy Valley Goose Bay in Labrador
Right.
is often used for low-level flight testing and things like that. So it's a great military and aviation history here.
Have you been able to see a correlation between the people who are seeing these apparitions or these ghosts, a common thread?
That is something that I haven't been able to do. What actually astonishes me is how varied the people are.
Mm-hmm.
You would think there's maybe one type of person that has experiences, but I
Right.
find honestly the opposite to be true. That I meet people from all walks of life, very, very different people. Businessmen and school teachers and young people, old people, all of whom who have had uncanny experiences, and there really isn't a common thread that links them. The paranormal doesn't seem to differentiate in some way. They appear to who they will appear to.
What are your final thoughts for our listening audience around the world?
I guess just be curious. I am constantly curious, and I'm always listening to people. I think sometimes I find people are at times reluctant to tell their stories because they think they're going to be derided or mocked because of what has happened to them. And I think
Right.
we miss out when we take that approach. We need to keep kind of an open mind and ask questions and listen to people's stories.
Where can people buy copies of your books?
If you go to Flanker Press online, you can just do a Google search for Flanker Press. I think it's flankerpress.com. You can find the books through there, or you can go to my website, nlunexplained.ca, and there is a section there called Books, and you can click on that, and that will take you right to the book website as well.
Dale, I want to thank you ever so much for joining us. It's been a great pleasure talking to you. I wish you continued success both in your folklorist role as well as being the man behind Haunted Hike. Don't be a stranger to us here in the X Zone, and when you find out that information on the haunted Tim Hortons, please let us know. We'll get you right back on.
I will. It's been a treat to have a chat.
Take care of yourself, young man.
You too.
Bye-bye now. X Zone Nation, our guest this hour has been Dale Gilbert Jarvis. His websites are nlunexplained.ca and hauntedhike.com. And he is in St. John's, Newfoundland. We'll be back on the other side of this commercial break with the news at 6.5 minutes past the top of the hour as the X Zone continues with yours truly, Rob McConnell, from our broadcast center and studios in Hamilton, Ontario, Canada. Don't go away.
Modern Esoteric, Beyond Our Senses by Brad Olson, consummates the lifeology story about where humanity originates. It is the lost continents, the primitive wisdom, the mythos of creation, and the rethinking of ancient history as we are taught in academia. There is much more to the story than what we have been told. As this is the first book in the Esoteric series, Modern Esoteric starts at the beginning of time and accelerates up to this modern age. Future Esoteric is book 2 in the series and takes a forward-looking position ahead of today with an open and honest examination of the ET issue and various unexplained phenomena. To discover the writings of author Brad Olson, visit www.bradolson.com. That's www.bradolson.com. Are you or is someone you know struggling with addictions, depression, anxiety, relationships, low self-esteem, lack of confidence, grief, success, and prosperity? Do you know that your subconscious belief plays a big role in the outcome of your hard work? We can help you permanently change the beliefs that may be the reason for your struggles and failures. We care about getting you the return on your investment and the results you are looking for. We can help you be free of the limitations of your past and in realizing your highest potential. We work with people by phone and Skype. For more information, visit us at www.ritasoman.com. That's www.ritasoman.com. Do you think you have energy problems in your home? Do you feel better when you're away than when you're home? Joey Korn is a global leader in the world of dowsing who specializes in personal energy clearing and space clearing. He can help you create an ideal energy environment in your home no matter where you live in the world. Learn about his remote spiritual house cleaning services and much more at www.dowsers.com. You can get Joey's book, Dowsing, A Path to Enlightenment, as well as other dowsing books and tools, Kabbalah books, and Walter Russell books. Joey's work is really amazing. Go to dowsers.com right now. That's DOWSERS.com or call 1-877-DOWSING. That's 1-877-369-7464.